Good afternoon, and hello and welcome to today's City Club of Boise virtual conversation, the Complexities of Homelessness. I am Todd Dvorak. I'm co-chair of the City Club Forums Committee, proud City Club member, and today's moderator. I want to welcome our radio listeners who will be joining us via Boise State Public Radio on KBSX 91.5 and its affiliates throughout Southern Idaho and Northern Nevada. This program is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel for those who want to view it later. Today's forum is available for our audience in large part because of our City Club partners and sponsors. I would like to thank some of the organizations that help make our programs possible. Our premier sponsor is Northwest Nazarene University and the NNU College of Business. Our annual sponsor is the University of Idaho. We also receive support from forum series sponsors, including AARP Idaho, Bank of Idaho, Climate Tech Corporation, the Echelon Group, Micron, Pacific Source Health Plans, Small Mine Development, and the St. Luke's Health System. City Club of Boise receives grant funding from the Idaho Humanities Council. And we'd like to thank our media partners, which include Boise State Public Radio, 670 KBOI, the Idaho Statesman, Idaho Public Television, and our university partners, BSU and NNU. We would like to acknowledge the ancestral, cultural, traditional, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people upon which we are meeting today. Finally, I'd like to thank the City Club members of Boise. More than 500 individuals and organizations make up our group. If you are listening now and not yet a member, I encourage you to join today. For our audience, please remember that there is an opportunity for our panel to respond to your questions today. You can use the question and answer function of Zoom, just type in your question, or you can email it to Morgan, M-O-R-G-A-N, at cityclubofboise.org, and it will be provided to me. I will do the best to present each question and may group similar inquiries together in the interest of time. Now on to today's topic, the complexities of homelessness. With more than 1,000 people experiencing homelessness in Ada County in this year, our community recognizes this is a growing crisis. Tackling this community problem requires collaboration and data-driven best practices. It's a complex issue, one that generates a wide variety of thoughts and opinions across our community. As many know, there's a robust debate and public discussion occurring right now surrounding a proposal to relocate Interfaith Sanctuary Shelter west of the downtown core. Our intention with today's conversation is not to rehash or hold our own debate about the pros and cons of that proposal. Instead, our hope is to examine the much broader issue of homelessness, the challenges facing our community, and the potential solutions. All right, let's get this conversation rolling. We're joined today by three members of our community who are involved in this very collaboration, each in their own way. Welcome them here this afternoon. We have Stephanie Day, who is the Executive Director at Catch and Our Path Home Chair. We have Nikki Hellenkamp. She is Boise Mayor Lauren McLean's housing advisor. And we have Wendy Secrist, the Executive Director of the Idaho Workforce Development Council. We're going to just start off by giving each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and talk about their background. So Stephanie, let's start with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having us this morning. I'm really excited that the community is having this conversation because it is such a complex issue. And it's great that when we can dig into it and figure out a little bit together. So I'm Stephanie Day. I'm currently the Executive Director of Catch. I'm a social worker. Moved here in 2007 from the Midwest and started working for the Salvation Army initially as a case manager in the Boise shelter that used to be here. And then 6 months later, they moved me to their Nampa shelter. So I ran the community family shelter in Nampa for about 8 years. And the last couple of years of that run, I also ran the Boise shelter. And I was in charge when we closed down that shelter and transitioned to a rapid rehousing program. And then I went to work for the city for a couple of years. My role at the city was helping all the different homeless service providers work together better to try to make the homeless services system more efficient and effective. Part of the main responsibility that I had at the city was helping plan and execute what we now call our Path Home Connect, which is kind of the entry point into all housing resources for people experiencing a housing crisis in Ada County. So my role at the city was helping all the different providers create that. And then when we got ready to launch it in 2017, Catch's executive director, which is where it's housed, asked me to come over and run it. So I did that for the first couple of years I was at Catch. And then our executive director left. And in 2019, I took over as executive director. So about 13, 14 years of experience working on homelessness issues in the Treasure Valley.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next, I would like to introduce Nikki.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with Stephanie, Wendy, and Todd today. My name is Nikki Olivier Hellenkamp, and I'm the Mayor's Housing Advisor for the City of Boise. I grew up here in Boise and went to school in Philadelphia after graduating Boise High. And my first job out of college was working for a permanent supportive housing and homeless services provider in Philadelphia, and worked there for several years in a number of different roles. And two of the roles were as an overnight support staff in a permanent supportive housing location that was providing permanent housing for formerly homeless women. And I really got to see firsthand the impact for the women who lived there of having a permanent home that they could truly afford, that there didn't need to be this monthly stress of how am I going to pay their rent, how am I going to get through, and where there were supportive services that could really wrap around them and make sure that they weren't alone in dealing with everything that life brought them. So really, really got that firsthand experience of seeing the difference that can make in a person's life and in the lives of everyone in their community, their family, their friends, their, coworkers, or the people that they interact with, every day. So that was a really, really meaningful work and really spurred me to want to continue in the housing realm. So then I headed for Seattle for a master's in social work program at the University of Washington. And after that, went to work for a group called the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County as a policy advisor. And that group is really made up of all the folks in the Seattle-King County area who are trying to figure out how do we create more affordable housing, including permanent supportive housing? How do we make sure that everyone in our community, regardless of income, has a place that they can afford to live that does not cause that constant sense of stress of, am I going to be able to stay here next month? Am I going to be okay? So that was great work, and I loved it. And then also went on to work for the city of Seattle there, and then got the opportunity to come home. And I'm so happy to be back where I grew up in the city of Boise, and to be working on this very, very important issue. And I know we'll talk more about how housing and homelessness intersect. But I'll just say now that they are absolutely inextricably linked, and we can't have one conversation without the other. So I'm really happy to be here to be part of the discussion today.
Great, thank you, Nikki. Wendy, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and certainly, the component that employment is a critical aspect of this conversation as well.
Sure, thanks, Todd. So I'm Wendy Secrist. I'm the Executive Director of the Idaho Workforce Development Council. The council is a small government agency. We sit under the Executive Office of the Governor, and the goals that the Governor has given the council are to increase public awareness of and access to career education and workforce training, improve effectiveness, quality, and coordination of programs and services designed to maintain a highly skilled workforce, and to help provide for the most efficient use of federal, state, and local workforce development resources. My background has been, I've spent over 2 decades working in workforce development, economic development, higher education. And when I pull it all together, it's really about connecting people to the dignity of work. That, housing, homelessness, having a strong community foundation is so critical for the health of the economy of a state, of a local area, because without that strong community, you can't have a strong workforce and you can't have the job creation that comes along with economic development. So I'm going to give a couple, I'm going to provide a few statistics because I want to talk a little bit about, what is going on in economy, in Idaho's economy right now, and some of the opportunities that we have to really engage anyone that wants to be in the workforce. But there are critical steps that have to be taken before we can engage folks who are homeless. And so I want to make that tie as well. So just over the next 6 years or so, the Department of Labor anticipates that Idaho employers are going to create over 105,000 jobs. During that same time, only 90,000 individuals are going to enter the labor force. So there's 2 things that are really important with those numbers. One is that we aren't going to have enough people in the state to fill the jobs that we anticipate becoming open in the during that time period. So we're going to have to look outside. How do we bring more people into the labor force? And that doesn't just mean outside of the state, but how do we grow our labor force? It also means we really need to be thoughtful about the 90,000 people that we will have entering the labor force and making sure that they have the right skills for those jobs. If we look at kind of the real-time labor market, from September 15th until today, there have been over 70,000 job postings in the state, and nearly 43,000 of them have been in the Boise MSA. Many of them don't require a college degree. Most do require something beyond high school. But we've been working on developing programs that can help any Idahoan access high job demands, my brain is a little fuzzy this morning. So access high demand jobs. If we look at just this past month, there were 27,000 job postings and only 25,000 unemployed individuals in the state. So we have a situation where we have less than 1 job seeker for every job opening. And that's just it's not a healthy market for anyone. One of the areas where I said we don't necessarily have to look outside of the borders of our state, but within our state, is that our labor force participation rate right now is 62.4%, which is down about 2% from pre-pandemic. But the all-time highest in the state was in 1998 at 71.4%. So even if we were to just get back to the 64%, that would add another 18,000 people to the workforce in Idaho. So all of that said, the opportunities to partner, the opportunities to engage folks into the workforce that want to be in the workforce are really high, but basic needs have to be met first. And housing and food security, childcare, transportation, all of that is integral in helping somebody not only obtain, but retain a job. If we move straight to a job and we think that, that we can take somebody who is homeless and we haven't resolved those basic needs first and move them directly into a job, the likelihood that they're going to lose that job is pretty high. And that's another cycle that, we wouldn't want to have to break, where, we're seeing somebody become employed, unemployed, becoming employed. So, what Stephanie and Nikki are talking about and what other organizations are doing to assist the homeless is just so important. But our workforce system, once those basic needs are met, it's really here to help. And the role of the Workforce Development Council is to connect individuals and employers to the agencies and the programs that provide those types of workforce services. So that includes job search assistance, resume development, practice interviewing, paid training, work experiences on the job training. All of the programs tailor services to the individual and provide those supportive services that Nikki mentioned, like access to work clothes, gas cards, childcare vouchers, and other things to help support individuals in keeping the job. So I'll drop a link in the chat later on with a link to a flyer that provides contact people in the Treasure Valley for those workforce agencies, includes the Department of Labor, Vocational Rehabilitation, Community Colleges, Commission on Aging. All of those are organizations that we work with to create the partnerships and the resources to support people into transitioning into employment. And then, if we have time later, I can talk a little bit about a program that we've developed over the last year that provides access to any Idahoan who wants to either reskill or upskill so that they can have that access to the jobs.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. That was a comprehensive look at all of what you're doing at the agency, and appreciate that. I just want to remind our audience that you can submit questions. There are two ways to do that as we move forward in this discussion. One is in the QA function for Zoom, just typing it in, or you can email it to Morgan, MORGAN, at cityclubofboise.org, and she will share it with us. To get things started, I am going to just, I think this is probably a question best addressed by Nikki and Stephanie, but if you can give us a sense of just how serious the housing challenge is, or the homelessness challenge is here in the Treasure Valley. I think, most of our audience has probably read in the media the stories and the issues that are around this. We've probably, seen the stories out of some of the bigger cities like Seattle and San Francisco and Los Angeles about, severe housing shortages and homelessness issues. But here in the Treasure Valley, and from your perspective, how do you characterize that? Nikki, why don't you take it first?
Oh, Nikki.
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that a little bit, and I know Stephanie will be able to speak as well. So the City of Boise did a housing needs analysis earlier this year, and essentially what that analysis found was that over the next 10 years, we need to produce, in order to meet the projected housing need, we would need to produce something like almost 28,000 units of housing. So we're talking about almost 2,800 units per year over the next 10 years. And one of the really significant things that analysis found was that of those units, 77% of them would need to be affordable to households at 80% of the area median income or less. And just to give you a sense, I know as soon as people start talking about area median income, everyone's eyes kind of glaze over, including mine. So when we say 80% of the area median income for a 3-person household, which is the typical household size in Boise, you're talking about an income of about $54,000 a year. And the affordable rent that would be considered affordable to that household would be a rent of about $1,350 a month. We calculate affordable rent as being about 30% of a person's income. So about 77% of the units produced would need to be renting at around that rate. And what we have seen by looking at the data on the units that have been approved for construction since March, when we look at the affordability levels of those units, we see that we are seeing a very large production of units. There have been over 2,000 units approved since March of this year. So if we're looking at that goal of about 2,800 units a year, we're not far off from being on track if those current development trends continue. However, if you look at the number of units that are affordable to folks making less than 80% of the area median income of that group, it's a very, very small number. And if you look even more deeply at the 60% of the area median income or less, which is truly where the bulk of the need is. It's more than 50% of the need for new units is for people who are making less than 60% of the area median income. So that would be for a household of 3, an income of essentially $40,000 a year. So for that household making $40,000 a year, you're talking about an affordable rent of about $1,000 a month. The number of units that we know of that were approved at that rental rate since March of this year is 63. So when we look at the enormous mismatch between 63 units and the number of people in our community who we know need housing that's affordable at that rate, it is a very, very big concern. And I think that, conversationally, it comes up all the time that people are saying, well, look, all of these new units are being produced, but we look at the rental rates on them and we can see that they're not affordable to people on Boise budgets. So how are we going to meet the needs of people in our community? And I know Stephanie can talk more specifically to the level of need related to our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness.
Stephanie, why don't you go ahead and share your perspective? But before you do that, one of our audience members wanted to know what CATCH stands for. Can you articulate that?
Oh man, you would ask this question. So CATCH actually stands for Charitable Assistance to the Community's Homeless. That is legally our name. I will say we don't like to use that acronym a ton these days because one, charitable assistance makes it sound like you're just like throwing money at a problem and you're not like walking alongside people and helping them figure out how to resolve their own situation, which is really what we do. And we do try to use people first language. So instead of talking about homeless people, we talk about people experiencing homelessness. When you're face to face with someone who's experiencing homelessness, giving them a label like a homeless person has a really strong emotional impact on them versus talking about a person experiencing homelessness, which is a temporary changeable situation. So you would ask that. That's technically what our acronym stands for, but we're kind of ashamed of it. So we go by CATCH most of the time. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to just give us a glimpse of what you see on the ground and how serious the issue is here, and then we can move on.
Yeah. So as far as homelessness, what I'm going to be referencing when I talk about homelessness is people who are either in a shelter or in a vehicle, abandoned buildings, or literally fleeing domestic violence. So we are kind of funded by HUD programs in our continuum here, and living with friends or family or staying in a hotel, HUD considers to be imminently at risk of homelessness, but not actually experiencing homelessness. So if we're talking about literally just folks in shelters or cars, we have seen on average before COVID, about 150 households, families that would be experiencing homelessness at any given time. Households without kids, like adult only households, people that maybe have adult children or they're couples without children or single folks, usually around 400 people at any given time. With COVID, what we've seen is about the same number of people entering the system last year and this year. However, all the wait lists are getting much, much longer because what we're also seeing happen is folks, once they enter the homelessness system, cannot get back out. So in a normal year before COVID, we would have about 80 to 85 families that would what we call self-resolve, which kind of means that they're able to figure out their own situation without the assistance of the system. They find their own place, they move in with family, they figure it out, and they don't need homelessness services anymore. That is the piece that has changed since COVID. We're not seeing people able to self-resolve and figure out how to get out of the system without our assistance. So that's what we're seeing in a nutshell.
Great. All right, so I've got a question from the audience, and I think we can fold all three of you into some kind of response here. But the question is, what are the barriers to building housing that is, deemed affordable or fits in these different categories of affordability, and especially as it relates to those on those lower income scales? And I think, Wendy, what I'd like to hear from you at some point is how does the wage scale that we see at the state, private business, and how is that impacting this conversation and this ability to solve this issue. Nikki, why don't you go first?
Sure, I can jump in there. So particularly for housing that's affordable to families, to people who are making less than 60% of the area median income. So again, for a household of 3, we're talking about a household income of around $40,000 a year or less. And an affordable rent then for that 3-person household of about $1,000 a month. In order for a housing provider to charge rents that are at or below that level, it becomes the math of it becomes challenging to make that financially viable. And in order for those buildings that are going to serve households at or below 60% of area median income to be financially feasible, because the expected rents are going to be lower, it almost always requires some kind of a public subsidy, of public funds. And one of the real challenges here in the state of Idaho is we have very few sources for those types of public funds. Basically, everything we have is federal money. So one common source of funding for affordable housing is the federal low-income housing tax credit. That's a federal tax credit that if anyone really wants to nerd out on it, it's very complicated and interesting, and I won't go into how it works now, but it's one of the biggest funding mechanisms for affordable housing in our country right now. It is limited, and it has to spread out all over the state in terms of where those credits can be allocated. Some states have a state low-income housing tax credit as well, which produces an additional source of funding to help make those affordable housing buildings financially feasible. The developers will say it'll make them pencil. Some states, many states, have a state tax credit. The state of Idaho does not. Most other states have a funded housing trust fund, which is a fund that the state puts money into every year, or in many states has an allocated funding source that then is specifically set aside for affordable housing development. The state of Idaho has a housing trust fund, but has never allocated money into it. So it's sort of an empty bucket that's been sitting there since the 1990s. And there has been some conversation this year around how do we get, is it possible to get some of that state funding, since there is quite a bit of state money? Is it possible for some of that to be spent on affordable housing? The other source of funding for affordable housing is, the City of Boise does have some federal pass-through dollars as well. We have money that the federal government gives to us because we're a big enough city that we are assigned a certain number of dollars, and then we're able to distribute those to affordable housing projects. But that number is really limited. And so it really does come down to the financial feasibility of the project, in terms of, if you're going to be charging lower rents, the project's going to make less money, making it much harder to build. So that's a big, it's not the entire problem in terms of barriers, but that certainly is a significant barrier.
Wendy, I want to get you engaged here. Any perspective on whether wages, minimum wage, are adequate to help with this issue?
Well, it's interesting because, over this past year and a half, Idaho has seen some of the largest growth in wages, compared to the previous decade. But the challenge is that at the same time, our housing prices have risen so significantly. And, so had the housing prices not gone up, the wage growth would have, been a welcome, surprise and support. Part of the, in the beginning of the pandemic, with the loss of, retail and service types of jobs, those are the lower wage jobs. So, you saw the growth in the higher wage jobs. But now we're seeing, you can't go down any street in the Treasure Valley and not see, fast food restaurants or grocery stores or others offering Most are offering $15 an hour or higher as entry-level pay. And, that shows you, that the market, rather than the government, having to raise the minimum wage, has reacted, right? Doesn't mean that all jobs are paying well, but even at $15 an hour in the Treasure Valley, it doesn't provide a wage that allows you to access housing in many cases. So I don't know that I can add much more than that, Todd. Wage growth is happening. It's a good thing. If we could just figure out how to, turn back the housing market price increases, it would help us a whole lot more.
Sure. Thank you for that. Nikki, Stephanie asked another question here from the audience and wondering if there are some planning and zoning regulations that can be adjusted, modified, changed to accommodate, more opportunities to build affordable type housing.
Sure, I'm happy to take a swing at that. So something that is frequently part of the conversation and has been done in other cities is the idea of some kind of expedited or streamlined review for affordable housing developments. So essentially saying, if what you're planning is units that are going to be affordable to people on Boise budgets, then we are going to look differently at the way we handle your permitting. So maybe in some communities, they will assign a designated person in the planning department to say, I'm going to be your person and I'm going to shepherd this all the way from beginning to end in order to make the process go faster, more smoothly. In other communities, they've done things like shift from design review, the usual design review process, which involves it's quite lengthy. It involves multiple, oftentimes going multiple times before committees, going to administrative review, where you're really relying on the administrative process to approve those units, which is much faster. And I think there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had around the pros and cons of both of those methods, but they're certainly part of the conversation. Yeah.
Stephanie, anything to add on your end for that?
Well, Nikki didn't mention it, so I don't know how much of this is public, but I do want to give the City of Boise props because we have in the last several years revamped our accessory dwelling unit requirements. So that would be like if someone had space in their yard and they wanted to build an accessory dwelling unit that they could use as a rental. Getting creative in those ways. And there are staff at the city right now that are dedicated to trying different pilots of innovative, creative thought ideas. And so I won't speak in depth to that because I'm not sure how much of that is like public knowledge, but I will say, I feel like the City of Boise staff are really trying hard to think outside of the box and figure out ways to address that issue.
Thanks for bringing that up, Stephanie. Yeah, and it is public, so it's totally fine.
And
yeah,
Nikki, as you answer that question, I'm wondering if you can give people, the audience, an idea of what this ADU housing looks like, in real concrete examples, so to speak.
Sure. So an ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, which means it is an extra dwelling unit beyond your regular home. So sometimes a frequent thing that example is an apartment that gets built over the top of a garage, or maybe the garage, you get rid of it and there's just another freestanding structure. It could also be kind of an in-law unit type situation. But essentially, it's what's referred to sometimes as subtle density, that it allows for an additional dwelling unit, additional space within, an existing neighborhood that doesn't involve knocking something down and building on top of it. So the city did change its requirements around accessory dwelling units a few years ago, trying to make it easier for people to build them, and is now we're getting ready, hopefully in the new year soon, to launch a pilot that would essentially look at what additional incentives the city could offer to folks to not only build an accessory dwelling unit on their property, but specifically to rent it at affordable rates. Because we do have this question mark from a lot of people in our community around, okay, well, so people are going to build an accessory dwelling unit and now it's a yoga studio or now it's an Airbnb. And it's not actually doing anything to deal with the fact that we have so many people in our community that need an affordable place to live. So that's a piece that we're looking at with a lot of interest to say, you know, is it possible for the city to provide these kinds of incentives, which include the streamlined permitting that I mentioned, provide these kinds of incentives? Would that be enough to make financial sense for a homeowner to potentially construct an ADU and then rent it out at that affordable rate? And I mean, I think it's really important to be innovative, to be thinking about ways that people in our community can be directly involved in the solutions to these problems, and to also be really real about the limitations here, right? You're talking about an ADU that's 700 square feet. So if you're, you know, a parent of 3 children, that's a tough space to live in, right? And if you are, you know, if you're someone who is looking to grow your family or has other kinds of needs that, you know, I think my main point here is that we often really want to look for a silver bullet when it comes to housing and homelessness, and we want it to be easy and simple and like everyone build an ADU and, you know, job well done and we'll all be finished. And it truly is not the case. I think Stephanie alluded to this earlier, that we need to have a multitude of responses, because human beings, it turns out, we're not all the same. And so we really do need to have that broad spectrum of response so that we can respond adequately. Yeah, so that's
I'm gonna ask a follow-up question to that, but before I do, I want to remind our radio listeners that you are tuning into a City Club of Boise virtual conversation about the complexities of homelessness. Stephanie or Nikki, on the ADUs, for people who do that and decide to make that investment and to serve that segment of our population that needs housing, are there services or are there organizations there to help those folks, to help the property owners who are renting out this space, you know, not only connecting them with appropriate clients, but, you know, sort of part of the wraparound service providing that is sometimes necessary?
Sure, I can speak very briefly to what the pilot envisions and then turn it over to Stephanie for the other types of support that's out there. So in terms of just this pilot project, the city's, our plan is to work with a nonprofit in our community that would be able to provide support to the housing provider around, you know, oftentimes you're thinking about folks who they've never been a landlord before maybe and need to understand what their responsibilities are as a landlord, what kinds of, you know, what are the best practices in terms of finding a tenant, in terms of the lease agreement, etc. So that support from that nonprofit will be there but specifically for the you know, landlord. And in terms of the agreement, they would be making an agreement with the city around holding their rental rates at that affordable rate for a certain number of years. So that's how the pilot is, at least at this point, you know, anticipated to run. And in terms of what kinds of supportive services might be available to folks in our community who are looking for housing, I would definitely, you know, look to Stephanie for that.
You want to take that, Stephanie?
Sure. Yeah. So if someone builds an ADU and they would like to rent to a household transitioning out of homelessness, there are lots of programs with tons of support that come with that rental agreement. So depending on the program, because there are several different programs, all the programs provide case management. So there is someone whose whole job is to stay connected to that household, that tenant, and make sure that they are getting to a point where they can live independently, they can afford rent and utilities on their own. If there are any tenancy issues, they can mediate those issues. We all work really hard to make sure that our landlords feel supported and get enough support from us to feel like what they're doing in partnership with us makes it worth their while. So we have gotten really creative at, usually people's number one concern is, what if there are damages? Because I'm renting to someone who doesn't have a large income, so I'm probably going to lose money having to repair my unit. So a lot of us have damage assistance funds. So if there are damages, we can help reimburse the cost for that. Several programs can do double or triple deposits. We can do vacancy payments, like if someone leaves a lease early and they're willing to rent to another tenant that's transitioning out of homelessness, then we can cover the costs that the unit is empty and being turned over. So we try to work really, really closely with our landlords to make sure that they feel like they have all the support that they need, so that they don't feel like they have to be a case manager, because that's not necessarily something that you want to take on if you're just trying to rent a unit to help.
Sounds good. Thank you. I want to get Wendy involved here in the conversation. And there was a question from the audience early on in our conversation. And Wendy, you had raised your hand in a virtual space here to want to address that. Talk about the availability of work release programs at the high school level. And then if you can, there's sort of a related question in terms of you know, why are employers having such a difficult time right now finding people to fill these jobs? You know, and we're not just talking about, you know, the $15 jobs at Subway that we see on State Street. We're talking about, you know, higher paying wage jobs in the $25 an hour category.
Sure. You know, and to that first question about, you know, work release programs for high school students, and I want to go even broader than that and just talk about, you know, what we're doing and what others are doing to really help connect education to careers. Because if we don't start early, then, you know, and help make that connection to opportunities and to careers, you know, then we end up having to, you know, provide these additional supports as our youth, you know, transition out of high school, maybe go do some college, but don't end up finishing and end up with student loan debt and all of these other factors that, you know, can certainly lead them to homelessness. So the council is working really closely with the State Board of Education to work with our schools throughout the state to help create opportunities, help really redefine, you know, what that post-secondary success looks like. You know, over the past number of decades, we've somehow managed to, you know, connect college to a four-year degree, and that's what success is, right? So if you don't go to college, you don't get a four-year degree, you're not successful. There are opportunities, there are jobs, you know, throughout this state that take less than a college degree, that take less than an associate's degree, and pay wages that, you know, can buy a house, can, you know, sustain a family. And so we're trying to change the dialogue, change the image and the messaging around, you know, careers in the trades, careers in, you know, healthcare, careers that don't require 4-8 years of education post high school. And then how do we create opportunities to just connect them, you know, for the kids who figure out what they're passionate about and what they're interested in? Why can't they start while they're in high school? One of the programs that we received a federal grant to run is a youth apprenticeship initiative. And we're focusing it on high school juniors and seniors. So, you know, that they can do some career exploration, you know, middle school, 9th, 10th grade. If they've decided that, you know, cybersecurity is the path for them, or that, you know, electrician is what they want to be, or, you know, in healthcare, then we can connect them to an apprenticeship program where they can actually start working and making an income while they're still in high school. And so to that question of work release, or, you know, release time in high schools, yes, our high schools are more than willing to partner with employers and organizations that help connect those kids to career opportunities so that they spend part of their time in the classroom, part of their time at the work site. You know, they're on track to succeed in both, to graduate and to, you know, complete their apprenticeship program. The more that we can, you know, really help people identify what they're passionate about, help them connect to the right type of training. And that training is a, you know, truck driving program, right? That's a 4 to 6 weeks. And we've been through the program I mentioned earlier. We started a new program through the Workforce Development Training Fund called Idaho Launch, where any Idahoan can receive support between 75 and 90% of the cost of the tuition or fees for short-term workforce training, whether they're employed, unemployed, so looking to upskill, reskill, whatever it is. But truck driving is one of those. And we have an incredible demand for truck drivers right now in the state and in the country. We're paying, we've paid already for almost 400 people to go through their truck driving training program. It costs about $5,000 and it's not eligible for federal financial aid or any other type of support. So these individuals in 4 to 6 weeks can access jobs that pay $65,000+ a year. And not all truck driving is long haul, you know, truck driving. There are opportunities within the community, you know, where you're home every night. So just looking at how we connect the opportunities to the training, to the individuals who are seeking to change their, you know, where they're at in life is so important. And working with, you know, Stephanie mentioned the case managers and others that help people to be successful in their housing. So how do we do a better job of working with your case managers so that, you know, they're aware of the opportunities that we can provide for individuals to get them to that next pay level so that they don't slide back into homelessness because of one emergency room visit or one, you know, unexpected car repair.
Thanks, Wendy. Before I transition, of our audience members asked the question of where should they go to find the information about the assistance that you're talking about?
Okay, I'm going to figure out how to post that. I may have to send it to Megan because it's not letting me post in the Q&A. So.
Okay, is there a website or anything like that?
So the training program is idaholaunch.com. And then the flyer that I referred to, it's a little harder to dig. So Megan says that if I send it to her, she'll make sure that everybody gets it in the chat. So
okay, idaholaunch.com.
Yep, idaholaunch.com for the training program.
Great. Nikki, Stephanie, one of our audience members asked this question, and I think it's a good one. How can a community that decides to address the housing needs for the homeless and those that are struggling to find long-term housing or affordable housing, how can tackling that issue ultimately result into any savings to that community? Or is that, you know, a misnomer that there's a savings to be had by tackling this problem? Who wants it?
Okay, I'm going first, it looks like. Yeah, great question. So that's the great part about addressing homelessness, right? That like for folks who feel like housing is a basic need and everyone needs that, like that's like interventions make sense. And for folks who want to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars, it makes sense. So it's actually much more expensive to have people living in a shelter on the streets than it is to house them and provide services. We've seen with New Path, which is our first housing first model attempt in Idaho, that it saved the community over $2.6 million in the last 2 years. And that is all interactions with EMS, with the hospital systems, with the police, with the jail. So yeah, 100% housing is healthcare on so many different levels. And it is actually much more fiscally responsible to provide housing and supports than it is to invest in all the auxiliary needs that people have when they live in congregate living in unsheltered situations. Nikki, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I would just echo everything you said, that we as a community end up paying one way or the other. And not only is it a more fiscally responsible choice to make sure that people have a safe, healthy, and affordable place to live, it's also just the right thing to do as humans. That feels a little cheesy to say, but I think it's when you think about the decision that we're making by allowing things to continue as they are, what it means is that we are choosing to have a situation where when someone does not have enough money to afford a place to rent, our response system to that is emergency rooms and the police instead of a home.
All right, thank you. We're coming up on the 1 o'clock hour. I want to remind our radio listeners that you are listening to a City Club of Boise virtual conversation about the complexities of homelessness here in our communities. Probably have time for just a couple more questions. But, you know, Nikki, you and I were talking a couple days ago about this, and I wanted to see if you can talk about your experience working in other communities, other models for how to solve this problem, and offer some perspective of what has worked in other places that you've seen and what we can learn here in Boise and Ada County, how we can model that to get positive results.
Sure. So I think one thing that's important to note is that up until recently, right, we had a housing market here in Boise and in Idaho in general that did not serve everyone, but did serve many more people as compared to other parts of the country. So places like Philadelphia, like Seattle, those are places where housing affordability has been a real problem for a long time, right? It's not new there. And I think here we have had a closer match between kind of what Wendy was talking about. We had a closer match between the labor market and what people could make in wages and what housing costs were. They were not for everyone. They didn't match for everyone, but for many, many people, they were, you know, kind of ballpark with what you could make, you could afford a place. And what we've really seen, you know, in more recent years is this decoupling of the two, where, as Wendy was saying, housing prices are going way up and wages are going up a little bit, but not in any kind of way that makes them, you know, able to reach each other. Sorry for the folks on the radio. You can't see my very illustrative hand motions here. So yeah, I mean, when this is when you have a community that's trying to grapple with something that's relatively new, it's going to take some time for us to develop a really robust response. What that robust response can look like, and you know, may look like in other communities, is a coordinated, a level of coordination between everyone who works on this issue. That I think that Our Path Home does an amazing job of this on the homelessness front, on the homeless services side, on the permanent supportive housing side, and we don't necessarily have that level of coordination when it comes to affordable housing in general. And I think there's a space for a lot of growth there in terms of how do we have a really healthy, thriving ecosystem of organizations, of players who are really working together with an eye toward how do we make sure that our community can be affordable to everyone who works here, who lives here, who, you know, is part of the fabric of our community. And what does that look like? How do we all, with our various goals, drive toward that shared aim? And the organization I mentioned that I worked for before in Seattle, King County, did a lot of work in trying to, you know, brought together many, many different players and did great work in terms of just allowing for that coordination and cross-pollination to happen where people could be in the same room having the conversation that needed to be had in order to figure out what role they needed to play, and to find others who were a logical match for the work that they were trying to do. So I think that is something that that our community, is striving toward, but it's going to take some time for us to get to that level of coordination.
Stephanie, do you want to add anything based on your experience in this space?
Yeah, just kind of piggybacking off of what Nikki said. I've not worked in other communities in homelessness, but I have been to a lot of national conferences and picked people's brains because I'm always wanting to know what's working everywhere else. And I will say, like, I feel like our homeless services system, which I saw there was a question about what that means earlier. And it's basically like there are several key providers. If you want to know specifically, talk to me later, that provide homeless services for people who have different levels of need. So all of us, like, actually working together, like, our homeless services system has matured leaps and bounds in the last 5 years. And we're at a point where we're like, we know what interventions work. Really, the missing piece in this is the development community and figuring out the housing piece. And so bringing, like, our homeless services providers together with the developer communities and with, like, people who know how to create those housing solutions, like, that's what I'm hoping, and kind of like what Nikki was talking about, like, that's what I'm really hoping for over this next couple of years, that coordination we've found within our little world of social workers, that we can expand that and really partner in deep ways with people who know how to create these housing interventions.
Great, thank you. We only have a couple more minutes left, and instead of delving into another question, I'm wondering if each of you wants to just take a moment and offer some thoughts here as to leave our audience with as we tune out. I'll start with Wendy, to see if there's anything you want to add and wrap up.
Sure. I think that the title of this topic was very appropriate, the complexities of housing, because it is a very complex issue. And, looking at the Q&A and, talking about, are we even getting to the root causes of homelessness? There is so much complexity, but there are a lot of entities out there that are trying to help. And I think, to know that there are organizations, that there's, providers, there's individuals, who are all, taking ownership of what they can to address this issue, and collaborating with others is really a key takeaway. Idaho is, one of the wonderful benefits of Idaho is that we are such a small state that it is really easy for us to all work with one another. Stephanie has mentioned a couple times, well, call me, for more information on that. Call me if you have, questions about some of the work that we're doing. So, we're accessible. We all want to help, and we're all open to ideas and thoughts and volunteers to help with the issues. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, I will try to keep it really brief so Nikki can go too. I think what I just hope that people leave today's conversation understanding is, like, we're in a really unique period in time right now where we may not be beyond the point of no return. Like Nikki had mentioned, like Seattle and like Pittsburgh, like they're beyond the point of return. And we may, if we really lean into this and like come together to try to attack this challenge that we're having right now, we may be able to keep from becoming a Portland or a Seattle. And it's really going to take a lot of community will and partnership and collaboration. But I really believe that we could make a significant dent and keep our community from headed down that path if we act quickly. So just uniqueness of timing right now, like, let's do some stuff, guys.
Thank you, Stephanie. Nikki.
Yeah, I think I'll try to end on a positive note and say, to echo what Wendy had said, you know, one of the things I love about this community, and it was true when I was growing up here, and I think it's true now, is people here, we really feel like this is our community, that we have a stake in it, and that we have a role to play. And I think we are also, in general, people who are used to saying, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and let's get it done. And not just going to sit back and expect that someone else is going to, you know, come with a magic wand and fix things. And that gives me a lot of hope that I talk to so many people in our community who really deeply believe that they have a role to play and just want to understand what it is so they can go do it. And that is a really special thing about the city. The other thing that I'll say, just as a positive thing, is that, you know, in that vein of trying to identify what is within, what is our role to play. One of the things that I'm really excited about is that the City of Boise is looking at its own land and saying, how can we develop permanent supportive housing on this land? So, for example, Fire Station 5, if folks are familiar with it, it's right across from Rhodes Skate Park. That's a fire station that needs to be redeveloped. And part of the plan in that redevelopment is to include permanent supportive housing on that site, as well as the new fire station. So, you know, that's however many units that will be dedicated toward folks who in our community who are experiencing homelessness, and that'll be, you know, new permanent homes for people. So there are really exciting things happening. We need much more. But I really do believe that with the will of our community and all of us kind of teaming up together, that, as Stephanie said, that we can make some things happen.
All right. Well, thank you very much to our panelists today for your thoughts and insight on this issue. Thank you to our audience that has tuned in for this conversation. And I know it's left me with a lot to think about and a lot to feel good about in terms of what's happening to solve this issue. Again, this was the City Club of Boise, and the issue is the complexities of homelessness. And with that, I will end this conversation. Thank you. Thanks for everybody for tuning in.